In the Battletech narrative, what is a Frankenmech, and how do we represent this from the miniature perspective on the gaming table? So, of course, mechs being king of the battlefield, not to say that conventional weapons in terms of tanks and infantry aren't powerful or aren't very, very advanced, perhaps on par with battle mechs. A great example would be the PPC carrier. It's got a fusion engine. It mounts 3 PPCs on there, targeting system, tracking system, a pretty high-tech end piece of equipment. But compared to the manufacture of a battle mech, in terms of all the components, the sensors, the engines, the gyro, battle mechs represent the pinnacle of technology. And what we see on the time period, especially with the succession wars and that time period in the inner sphere, it's almost like knights. It's a type of nobility. So various mech warrior families and houses will go to great lengths to keep their mechs, to repair their mechs, and often we see in the narrative certain families, they own a mech, but it's in a state of disrepair, or certain systems aren't functioning and can't be replaced because they literally cost so much money. Combine this with the attrition rate of mechs, and that a lot of mechs are rebuilt or salvaged. What we see as we push out onto the fringe edges of space, where we have pirates and mercenary companies that are perhaps not as sophisticated as full-blown mercenary companies, but certainly a step up from conventional forces. They might have a couple of drop ships. They might have a couple of mechs, and these forces pulling together do represent, while maybe not a threat to the various houses in Battletech, they're a pretty serious threat to planetary governments and some of the small planets in the inner sphere that represent a target ripe for piracy. So a Frankenmech is one of these mechs that is part of the mercenary companies, not sponsored by a great house, wouldn't hire themselves out to the various great houses on there, and essentially the very, very high-end stratification of bandits and pirates. So what we see in terms of game turns is a lot of creativity in the design of these mechs, where a lot of things are mix and match to represent literally a base mech cobbled together, repaired time after time after time after time, and also on the lower end tech level. So imagine taking a Marauder. So the exercise we're going to look at, I'm on a Marauder kick right now. I've been playing the Marauder. I've always played the Marauder. I really enjoy it. Visually, it's a lot of fun. I can't wait for the new plastics. I can't wait a year on there for it. But imagine, take a stock Marauder just off the assembly line on there, Star League, and now age it a couple of hundred years. And maybe what we begin to see through battle damage and attrition and components, the PPCs either from malfunctioning or not being maintained or getting damaged or the arms blown off, maybe you replace them with something still potent but easier to maintain and not as efficient. So maybe you downgrade those to large lasers. Maybe you take away one of the medium lasers on there. Maybe you shift the armor around a little bit where there's less armor on the arms. Maybe the left torso has a little bit less armor than the right torso. There's this idea of creating a vastly imperfect type mech, but still potent and powerful. What we see on the tabletop, which is different, I should say, than customizing your own mech. A mech customization will often be like literally you're starting down on the design board and creating a very potent, a very powerful mech on the technological level that you want to play, as if it's being rolled off the factory. What we see in terms of the miniatures, and this is where things get really, really interesting, because as you build up your mech collection, especially if you're trading for stuff on eBay and various online sources, you tend to have a lot of pieces that you just collect over time. And mechs, maybe you buy a lot of 4 or 5 mechs in there because you really only wanted 2, and the other ones you put in your big box. You can cobble these mechs together. So imagine maybe physically taking a Marauder body on there and replacing the autocannon with something else. And maybe replacing the arms with a straight autocannon. Maybe some pieces, the autocannon and the PPC arm from the Mackie on there. And then maybe taking some green stuff or modeling putty and having some armor plates, some primitive armor representing the fact that over time armor's been blown off and whatever passes for high-end boilerplate in the Battletech universe, literally welding that onto the Marauder body on there. So representing kind of a cobbled together war machine, but still at its core. While it's not a challenge for any of the great houses, it's certainly not a challenge for a dedicated mech company. It is still Battlemech technology. It still has gyros. It still has very powerful weapons. It still has mobility on there. And out on the fringe worlds, still a sight to behold.